Julie, thank you so much for being on the program, and some light at the end of the tunnel, some silver lining on these dark clouds. A January 6th political prisoner has now been freed based on the Supreme Court's review of Section 1512C2. Can you fill us in as to what's exactly happening here?
Right. So the Supreme Court in December announced that they would review the DOJ's application of 1512C2 obstruction of an official proceeding. This is a common felony. More than 320 January 6 defendants have been charged with 1512C2. It represents half of special counsel Jack Smith's 4-count indictment against Donald Trump for January 6th. But of course, the DOJ has weaponized that document shredding statute that was passed in the wake of the Enron Arthur Andersen accounting scandal, and instead used it to criminalize political dissent. And the idea that if anyone interrupted a meeting of Congress, which think about how often that happens, you have committed this felony that could land you in prison for up to 20 years. So the DOJ has brought this against more than 30 defendants. Only one judge has dismissed the count. This is how it finally ended up at SCOTUS. But judges in Washington are so nervous that the Supreme Court will come back, oral arguments are in April, that they will come back, Benny, and reverse how DOJ has applied this. They're getting so nervous about it that defendants are now seeking early release for imprisonment on that count. And a few judges have now released January 6 defendants because there's a strong feeling that the Supreme Court will overturn how DOJ has used this. They're also asking DOJ to seek plea agreements on other counts instead of this 1512C2. So the former chief judge recently warned that in June and July, the federal courthouse in Washington could be a disaster, with defendants seeking vacating of sentences, plea agreements, convictions, etc. And boy, wouldn't that be so well deserved by more than 15 judges who have allowed this count to go forward.
And you've sat through many of these trials, and they are heart-wrenching. The treatment of these January 6 political prisoners is evil. It is truly like Gulag-esque. We pray for them, and we thank you for your reporting on this. And before we sort of get to more of the Supreme Court taking on Jack Smith, I did want to stop for a second, and because I read the statute, I've read the statute a couple of times, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, I was physically at the White House when libs, an army of liberal orcs, stormed the White House, broke through the fences, threw bottles and bricks and everything onto the White House lawn. Donald Trump was taken into a safe room. They injured over 400 different security officers, Secret Service officers. Like, if you are causing the president's, if you are threatening the president's safety so much that he needs to be taken to a safe room, isn't that obstructing of an official? Isn't everything the president does an official proceeding? Where is the gulag for all these leftist orcs?
Well, there is no gulag, and more infuriatingly, Benny, all of those criminal cases, to the extent that charges were brought against what you're talking about, the protesters at Lafayette Square outside the White House in May and June of 2020, after George Floyd died. And this lasted for weeks. I mean, they were destroying monuments. They were burning parts of St. John's Church, which is across the street. And to your point, trying to scale the fence at the White House and overtake the White House, prompting the lockdown of the White House and placing Donald Trump and his family in a secure location. All those charges have been dropped, completely memory hold. And so obstruction of an official proceeding, seditious conspiracy. I mean, you name all of the charges that I've seen in January 6th could easily have been brought against those protesters. But all of those cases were dropped and forgotten in memory hold, even though that happened 7 months before January 6th. Not 7 years, 7 months. Could easily be bringing those same charges.
It really does sicken the soul, because it's the same people, right? It's the same people inside of these institutions, and they were there when Trump was there, right? It leads to a much larger question about the systemic rot inside of the system. I know this is ancient history, but during the Kavanaugh hearings in 2017, 2018, I was physically in elevators when senators were being assaulted. Like, I was standing there in elevators with my senator, Chuck Grassley, when libs stormed the elevator and stopped him from going to a meeting. Like, that's as much as what happened on potentially January 6th. and not a single person was charged. They took over the Senate like 1 million times. These these unhinged lunatics, and to try and stop Kavanaugh from being put on the court. And nothing. I mean, to my knowledge, not a single person was charged. But apparently, you could have charged him with a 1512C2 the entire time.
Easily, and threatening lawmakers and disruptive conduct in a congressional building. Look, you don't even have to go that far back. You can go back, Benny, a few months. Look at what the pro-Palestinian demonstrators, they did the same thing outside the White House at least twice, assaulting federal officers. They also disrupted numerous times Senate proceedings. They occupy parts of the Cannon House office building, which is forbidden. You can't take over and occupy and demonstrate in the Cannon House office building. I personally watched a video of 2 men coming right in Marjorie Taylor Greene's face, screaming at her. I mean, no one on January 6th got that close to federal lawmakers. Were those men arrested, thrown in a gulag, charged with threatening lawmakers or obstruction of an official proceeding or seditious conspiracy? Of course not.
No.
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that